Hi everyone. So thank you very much for being here for this talk today. I am Dr. Vincent Español. I am an assistant professor in Francophone Studies here in the Department of Languages and Culture. And I am very happy today to be welcoming Charlie Gargiulo as part of the Fox Team's series of this year. For his talk entitled Legends of Little Canada and Life of Activism. So I'm going to introduce Charlie briefly. This man has done a lot of things. It's not that great, but it's very interesting. And then Charlie will talk a little bit about himself and about what has led him to activism and his place in the history and maybe even the folklore of the city of Lowell. And we'll bring us back a little bit to Little Canada before its destruction, but also the aftermath of its destruction. And then we'll have a Q&A where hopefully I'm sure we'll have a lot of interesting things to talk about and questions to ask that are very interesting. So our first thing is I want to thank our sponsors for this event today, the Department of World Languages and Culture, the Department of History, and the English Department, as well as the College of Fine Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences here at UMass Lowell. And can you remind me of your bio? And this is an excerpt from John Whitting. So young Charlie, after the raising of Little Canada in 1964-65, went on to become one of Lowell's leading activists and community organizers. Having moved to public housing at North Common Village in Lowell's Acre neighborhood, Charlie finished his school year at St. Joseph's High School on Merrimack Street, graduating in 1969. He had a succession of jobs after leaving school as a material handler in the Lowell's boot mills, moving furniture, being trained as a welder, and toiling in an ink factory in Chelmsford. In the midst of the rock and roll era and the anti-war movement, Charlie was influenced by John Lennon's stance against the Vietnam War, prompting him to question blind support of it. Initially resistant to the draft, he eventually enlisted in 1972 out of concern for his son. Excelling in the army, he became dedicated to fighting racism and inequality, earning accolades for his efforts. Utilizing the GI Bill, he pursued higher education at UMass Lowell, where he engaged in activism and challenged biased historical narratives, advocating for a more inclusive portrayal of Lowell's history and the recognition of Jack Kerouac's legacy in the city of Lowell. In 1982, Charlie founded the Coalition for a Better Acre by organizing a coalition of institutional agencies and religious organizations to oppose these displacement efforts and allow the community time to organize resistance to these claims of urban renewal. As a result, Charlie served as the president of CBA, as it not only stopped the development plan that would have destroyed the homes and community of hundreds of residents, it became a nonprofit community development corporation that enabled and empowered the impacted residents to preserve and build affordable housing for themselves and in the community. CBA was to become and remains one of the most successful grassroots nonprofit organizations in the nation. Starting with Saving the Acre, CBA revitalized apartment buildings and houses and made them available to low-income residents. In a major initiative, they saved the 267-unit North Canal apartments after a 6-year fight led by Charlie. He and others proposed a plan to demolish the failed North Canal apartments on Moody Street, taking ownership of the complex from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, the first community takeover of an inspiring youth property in the nation. CBA went on to rehabilitate many more homes, revitalize neighborhoods, and create acre family daycare to train low-income women from many ethnic groups to start their own home-based businesses as family daycare providers. Today, Acre Family Child Care provides care for nearly 400 children every day, including overnight and weekend childcare for parents working second and third shifts. Through the 1980s and 90s, Charlie promoted social justice, confronted corrupt politicians, and called out those who simply didn't care. He took what had happened to the people of Little Canada to a community literally torn apart and turned it into a life of activism. A gifted public speaker, Charlie continues to fight for those who have little and for those who face the destruction of their community in the name of progress, profit, and so-called urban renewal. In 1991, the University of Massachusetts Lowell recognizes the enormous contribution Charlie had made to improving life for the poor in Lowell by presenting him with his annual Trustees Award. In 2019, he was honored by the International Institute of New England for being one of the 100 most important leading figures in Lowell's history for impacting the lives of Lowell immigrants. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you everybody for coming, for sure. And, you know, I haven't done this in a while, so I hope it goes off well. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about why I wrote this book and then go on to say about, I think, the experience I had in being forcibly displaced from Little Canada as a 13-year-old kid into, I think, what led to my life of activism. First of all, let me give you a little history. I think many of you probably know, but many of you don't. Little Canada was a section of the city of Lowell. If you're familiar enough, you take the river, you come up to Merrimack Street, go all the way down to City Hall, all the way up to UMass Lowell, North Campus. That whole area was French Canadian community that settled there around 1880s. The people came from Quebec to work in mills and to be strike breakers for the Irish. Then when they decided to become resistant as well and worked with the Irish, then they brought the Greeks in to be strike breakers for the for them. And then after that, when the Greeks got together, they brought in the Portuguese and saying, you get the picture, as I said in the book. But anyways, it was a tight-knit community. I ended up coming in there late. You might ask, well, how does a person named Gargiulo, get to be writing a book about Little Canada? You're going to say an Italian name. Well, it's because my mother was French Canadian, and my father took off at 11, which is kind of where the book starts. And we moved back into Little Canada. I was living in Drayton at the time. And because my father left, we had to move back into the city where my mother used to live, where her family was. And in a section of Little Canada, it's Austin Street. You can still find Austin Street down there, even though it doesn't look anything at all like it used to be. But it's on the shadow of what used to be St. John Baptist Church, which we all used to call St. John the Baptist. When I wrote this book about it was originally going to be called Little Canada, and finally ended up with the name Legends of Little Canada instead. It was because I moved there in '63, and this was the final days of Little Canada. They had already started this urban renewal plan that we didn't really know about. Poor people who lived in the tenant buildings. We just kind of heard rumors about it. I'm not hearing now, people talking about it. It just seemed surreal. As a kid, I was 11 years old at that time. I told 3 years, 63, 64, 65 when we finally get thrown out. In the early part, you're not sure that's going to happen. So what I tried to do is tell the story of what it felt like to a child, trying to understand this thing called urban renewal. We didn't have a face. It was just this thing, but it was always going to come and take our homes. And I had an aunt, my Aunt Rose, was very central to the story. It was like a second mother. And she was an amazing woman. But she had lived there all her life. She was 65 years old at the time. She was disabled. She had this bone of club foot. which I guess they don't have much anymore. They fixed it, you know, at least in America right now, but back then, you know, they didn't. We were poor, and basically she walked around on the side of the land all of her life. So she had a second floor apartment, and that was her work. She loved that place, and I think the key part, you know, because I can't go into a lot of it, but the key part of the impact on trauma to me, I think, was how much she loved that place. And when the final days were coming, it was very clear that we really were going to be thrown out of it. You could feel that sense of doom. I heard her one night when she didn't know, praying to God, not to throw her out of the apartment, because if we did, it would kill her. I spoil alert for people who read the book. If you haven't read the book, if you do read the book, I'm sorry to say she does die in the end. Little Canada does get destroyed. That's probably not a surprise. But in the book, you'll see it. I'm telling the story before that happens, and before it's a fait accompli, at least. And what it just feels like watching it slowly. One friend leaves 1 week, one friend leaves another week, and just the kind of horrific experience that is. You know, I remember as a kid just thinking, I say in the book a number of times, like, you can't do that, right? I mean, we don't live in Nazi Germany, right? I mean, people can't just come and take you home. And everybody's destroy you. I just seemed unbelievable at the time, you know? And, you know, sure enough, it did. And I'll speak later about how to live my life back at this. Because I was, from that point on, I couldn't stop what was happening as a 13-year-old. And I always wondered, why didn't anybody stop this? I didn't want to be in a position of seeing it happen again. And I was always looking for the answers to how that happened, who was behind it, and how, you know, I could be stopped from other people. But I'll try to give you a little reading from the book to give you a flavor of what I was trying to do, because I think the key was not to write a polemic book. And my partner was the one that convinced me to write the book. Because I'm not an author. I never intended to be a book writer. And I hated writing. You know, you always say you're supposed to love writing. You know, you got to practice every day as a writer. That wasn't happen. I hated writing. You know, I knew I could write, but I hated it. You know, but she told me, you already wrote them. You know, you've told me these stories ever since I've known you all the time. You tell me stories about, you know, your Aunt Rose, Little Canada, all the things that happened there. You know, let's just put down the stories that you told. And then it dawned, you know, tell it as a child. Tell it through my child's eyes. Instead of a polemic book trying to say, this is what happened to Little Canada, they came and this many people were displaced or whatever. How do you make people feel? I wanted to make people feel what that experience was like, so that you won't have just dispassionate academic debates about the pros and cons of you know, forced removal of people. You know, that there's a price that comes with that, and maybe I could, you know, sneak in there by having people hear it from an 11 and 13-year-old kid. So that, you know, it's not coming with ideology, it's not coming with an adult with an agenda. This is just what it felt like as a kid. And I'll try and give you a little flavor of that, and I'll tell you about how it went to my life back with this. So just have a listen to it. First part is just moved in. Like I said, my father left, and I was scared to death. You know, it starts off when I'm scared to death. I come from Drayton. I hear all these rumors about the city kids, you know, city kids are going to have knives and they're going to destroy you and everything else. You know, I'm just a kid from the town. So my first part was the first few months just hiding in my building before school starts, you know, assuming sooner or later I'm going to get my butt kicked, you know, and that's kind of where I'm at in here, just moving in and just kind of getting my first feel for what the neighbors are in my apartment, and to give you a feel a little bit about that experience. You know. After arriving in Little Canada, it didn't take me long to figure out that none of the immigrant groups got along very well, even though some of them were way down the line past being new immigrants. We stayed in our neighborhoods, and God help any kid who went along to the neighborhood of a different kind of God. We hated each other. Each group of kids had its own main street. We, the Canucks, had Moody Street, the Greeks had Market Street, and the Irish had Broadway. The main street of Lowell was Merrimack Street, which was lined with stores and led downtown. I remember reading about the Korean War. After nobody really won, the north and south parts of the country were divided, and a border area was set up between them called the demilitarized zone, or the DMZ. The message was that people could meet in this zone without killing each other, as long as they stayed off the other guys. Merrimack Street was our DMZ. We could all walk downtown and go to the movies, pool halls, and bowling alleys and buy things in all the stores. After we moved in, even though it was late July and hot as hell, I was too afraid to go outside, so I only read comic books and listened to the radio. My mom kept asking me why I wasn't going outside for fresh air, and I just kept telling her I didn't feel good. Fortunately, we had some cool neighbors. Instead of living in a house down the street like neighbors in a town, our neighbors lived inside our building. It was like having roommates. Across the hall from us was a friendly middle-aged guy, Raymond LaPerrier. He and my mother were pals since they were kids. He liked to jabber a lot. Unlike most people who drive you crazy doing that, for some reason, his jabbering was more relaxing than annoying. I'm not sure what was wrong with him, but he didn't work and was in his pajamas most of the time. We had an open door policy with Raymond, meaning we could just pop into each other's apartment without knocking, which you usually did about 100 times a day. Upstairs above our apartment, there's two unfriendly older ladies. I don't mean shy or private, I mean unfriendly. They just ignore you with a grumpy look if you saw them in the hallway and said hello. So we just let them be mean and cranky by themselves. Across the hall from them, above Raymond's apartment, was an older guy, Bill. He was gloomy with a rugged, tired-looking face. My mom and everybody thought he was a genius, but apparently his drinking ruined his health and he couldn't work. I could tell he was smart and tortured himself. He reminded me of Lon Chaney Jr. when he played the Wolfman. Like now, Bill knew the full moon was coming, and there was nothing he or anybody else could do to stop it. On the first floor below us lived an even older guy named Gene Bedard. He kept to himself, but wasn't unfriendly like the biddies above us. He'd say hello and be polite and friendly whenever we bumped into each other. He wasn't home a lot because he owned and managed a nightclub on Moody Street. In the other first floor apartment under Raymond's place lived the Giroux family. The husband's name was Ernie, and he was a little bit scary because he used to yell loudly at his wife and kids a lot. I don't know why he yelled at his wife Diane, because she was really nice. I felt awful for her, because it always seemed like she was way over her head trying to raise their three boys. Ernie never seemed to do anything except come home from work and complain about how badly she did her. I like to visit Diane during the day when Ernie was at work, although I found the kids annoying. I call them 3 R's because of their names, Roger, Robert, and Richie. They were creepy as hell. I mean, weird, like they were space aliens or something. Even though they were different ages, I think one was 6, one was 4, and the other was about 2, they looked exactly alike. They each had the exact same blonde crew cuts, looked at you with the exact same devilish smile. They would stand next to each other. Roger was 6 inches taller than his carbon copy brother Robert, who was 6 inches taller than his carbon copy brother Richie. They were like Russian wooden figures that you separate at the waist, and you'd be an exact same but smaller wooden figure inside over and over again. Oh, and top it off, all 3 of them would always be walking around the house naked above their waist, even in the winter. But the greatest part about living in my building is that I could step outside on the 2nd floor passageway and walk over to the other side of the apartment building and visit Aunt Rose, Uncle Clarence, and their dog Daisy, who was a collie that looked exactly like Lassie. My Aunt Rose's place was like a church sanctuary in the olden days, where somebody in trouble would run to and be protected from all the bad guys trying to kill them. Ever since my dad took off, it felt like the whole world was blowing apart, with everything changing so fast, my head was spinning. My dad was gone, my home was gone, my friends were gone, my mom was messed up, and I was surrounded by enemy kids waiting to take me out. The only good thing left in my life that hadn't changed was being able to visit my Aunt Rose. And Now I'll go to the second part. It's a little bit further along. I'll probably live there about a year. And I'll just give you a little bit of the flavor of the neighborhood, you know, I think what a kid feels like at 12 years old, maybe. After Mom began her barroom job, she loved to take me for dinner on Thursday afternoons at the Royal Steakhouse next door to the Royal Movie Theater. She let me order 2 complete cheeseburger deluxe dinners, a double cheeseburger with bacon, lettuce, and tomato plus French fries and a vegetable. She couldn't even believe I could put away all that and still have room for a large strawberry ice cream sundae. Once a week, usually on Sunday afternoon, she gave me a chance to either pick out a movie to see with her, or go duck pinball at an alley on the second floor of the building on the corner of Central and Middle Streets downtown. Of course, when I went to the movies with my mom, I would pick a movie I felt comfortable seeing with my mom. So I didn't choose a bloody movie with people shooting each other or monsters killing everybody. And I would pick a movie at the Strand on Central Street because it was the classiest theater and didn't allow kids to rent the place. Nothing made mom happier than making me happy. So I did my best to let her make me happy because there was nothing that made me happier than making her happy. She was also one of those parents who didn't try to force me to do things I hated. For instance, she knew I was a very fussy eater. And she did her best to get things to eat that were good for me, but that I liked. This was especially important on Saturday nights because of a little Canada eating tradition. Everybody went to this horrible spot called Rochette's on Grace Street, just a block down Moody Street from Cabot Street heading toward downtown. Rochette's was a diner known for making its famous Rochette's beans. They cooked them in gigantic vats, and everybody would go and buy them and take them home in white round cardboard containers. Then people would boil maple leaf brand hot dogs. Canadians like the maple leaf symbol. It had a gross, crunchy skin covering that made a snapping noise when you bit into them raw. This served boiled hot dogs with a giant plate full of sickly white beans and an even sicklier white goopy sauce that made you nauseous to even look at, because they looked exactly like we could end up puking. I get chills just thinking about the awful taste. I used to call them those shitty beans. And I'd rather be dead than eat them. Okay, so you're probably thinking, what's the big deal then? Nobody was making you eat that crap. So why would you care what other people are eating in Little Canada on Saturday night? Think about it. The answer should be obvious. Especially in the winter when I was living in a crowded apartment building. Remember the jingle? Beans, beans, musical fruit, the more you eat, the more you toot, the more you toot, the more you fart, the more you blow your pants apart. That's right. Every wintry Saturday night, throughout the large tenements of Little Canada, windows and doors were closed to keep out the cold. And through every stairway, 2 apartments on each floor, 3 or 4 flights, people were blasting away, adding layer upon layer of noxious gas to seep out of the cracks of their doors, to blend with the farts of the other apartments until they created a smell that would make a skunk beg for mercy. Oh, man. I used to barricade my front door and put towels and stuff under it and try to keep the stink out as best I could. I still can't figure out how each apartment building never exploded like an A-bomb from the gaseous fumes when somebody lit a match. Those shitty beans on a winter Saturday in Little Canada should have been outlawed as cruel and unusual punishment for even the world's worst criminals. And my last little section here. This goes a little bit along in the other situation there. At this point, it's kind of like the last year there. I'm sorry. And it's becoming obvious that it's happening. At this point, I've already lost a lot of friends. You know, it was a slow process. Buildings kept down slow but sure, you know, and it was getting closer and closer to us. And we weren't 100% sure what was going to happen to us yet. But, you know, this kind of gives you a little bit of the sense of doom that people felt. Yes. I was worried about Mom and tried hard to control my temper. Sometimes I felt like I was so nervous and upset I was going to explode. Then another bombshell hit. They announced a whole bunch of new buildings were gonna be torn down in Little Canada, including all the apartments on our side of Ford Street. This included the building that Alan Henry lived in on the corner of Ford and Austin Street. I still wanted to know who they were. So it would be goodbye, Henry. His family moved to Lawrence about 15 miles downriver toward the ocean. He wasn't coming back. Al and his family got a place on the other side of the North Canal about a mile away. They'd be close enough. This bombshell was the worst yet. Only a miracle was going to save the rest of Little Canada from the wrecking ball. Who were these urban renewal ghost people, and how could they do all this? Buildings were coming down on the other side of the downtown side of the canal and down Moody Street, and a number of buildings being abandoned and ready for demolition spread like a plague. Those of us left in Little Canada felt like people in the Middle Ages from the Black Death, watching all our neighbors dropping like flies and wondering if they and their life were going to get it. Like the Middle Ages, we had no idea how to stop it. I was afraid to visit my Aunt Rose because I didn't know what to say to comfort her. She knew our backs were against the wall, as the urban renewal wave of destruction was almost on our doorstep. I'm not proud to say I avoided visiting her for about a week after the Ford Street families were thrown out. More people were leaving all the time. On my torn apart collection each week, there'd be more empty apartments. Not only were we surrounded by completely abandoned and boarded up buildings, but also the ones that still have people living in them gave us the feeling that they were slowly dying. Tenements that had once been filled with tons of family bustling up and down the stairs, greeting each other in the hallways and streets now have just a trickle of people. People who once used to talk about all kinds of things when they met outside now barely said hello. If they spoke, there's news about who got an eviction notice and where that family was headed. Willis Diner closed, which meant Harvey must have been looking for another place where he could buy meal tickets for Captain Jack. The tiny gas station closed, so that meant Mr. Berra had to find some other place to terrorize kids. And then the Holiday Diner closed, my favorite place to eat, where Al's mom lived. Only the urban renewal office was busy. Families who were being thrown out had to stop in to get help finding a new place to live. The worst part of this damn place was it was on the corner of Austin and Moody Streets, a direct eye shot of my Aunt Rose, and she sat looking out her window. She saw the people being forced out of Little Canada marching into and out of that place. They might as well have put up a big neon sign saying, "We're coming to get you, Rose. And your little doggy too." I finally got the nerve to visit her, and sure enough, when I got there, she was sitting in a chair by the window, clutching her rosary beads with her eyes fixed on the urban renewal office. Even though it was only a little over a week since I saw her, she looked like she was a lot older. There were dark circles under her eyes, her hair had more silver streaks, and her face was sagging so much it looked like she was melting. And I heard her voice is really broke back. I could barely hear her speak when she told me Uncle Clarence and Daisy were out shopping. She asked me how my mom was and how school was doing, so I lied and told her they were both fine. I also didn't tell her anything about Al Henry being kicked out. She told me that she missed watching me play on Austin Street. I told her I'd be out there again doing things as soon as my arm healed. But the main reason I wasn't out there was because so many of my friends were gone. In fact, only Richie, Paul, Billy, and Dave were left. Because I found out the day I visited her, Donna, Frenchie, and Bum were also on the way out for 2 weeks. Bum's father would still manage Benny's variety, but they were moving to Centerville across the river. Donna's family was going to Shaughnessy Terrace, the same tough housing project that Dickie was relocated to. But at least Donna could take care of herself. Frenchie and his family returned to Quebec. I still hadn't taken this all in when I was visiting me. The best gang in history was being blown apart by the urban renewal. But as bad as that was, my sadness about the gang was nothing compared to the pain and fear about losing our home back roads being forced to move. The sting was killing her, I could see it. I asked her if the priest was still coming to see her, and she said he did, but she was very upset with him. When she asked him if they were finally going to stop throwing people out, he told her that it was up to God. She said, "Up to God, the nerve." I told him that was blasphemous. I told him God had nothing to do with it. People are doing this, and the church doesn't care. It is hiding behind God. The church leaders lied to us when we kept asking them if our homes were in danger of being taken. I told him to get out, never come back. And I judged God would judge them someday. Then she started crying. As I hugged her, Uncle Clarence came in with Daisy. They both rushed over to us. And Uncle Clarence already knew it was wrong as he patted my head and kissed Aunt Rose's cheek and told her that the person he talked to downtown told that some village would be left out and we just needed to pray that our building would be spared. He said he heard the clubhouse temp and the row houses on Cabot were going down, and maybe they were close to us, and so maybe we'd be okay. Aunt Rose found out, and he said, I brought food and I'm gonna bake my special apple pie today. I got one of Daisy's favorite soup bones at the market, so hang around for a while, Charlie, we'll have a special dessert together. Daisy slowly nuzzled Aunt Rose like she always did, and after Aunt Rose petted her, she came over to me so I could say hello and pet her. But I noticed that she didn't bound over me like she usually does because she seemed sad. After I petted her, she went right back to Aunt Rose and stayed by her side every second, instead of hanging out with Uncle Clarence in the kitchen while he was making dinner like she usually would do. That night, I felt like my whole world was falling apart. That's, and what comes after that is very clear. It just kept coming and finally, they did force my Aunt Rose out. And a week after she died. And I know it just happened to many other people, especially elderly people who have lived there all of their lives, not only themselves, but with their parents lived before them. In some cases, their grandparents lived before them. That's what stuck with me. And when I wrote the book, one of the things that bothered me after this, I was trying to find out those stories about what happened. One of the things that did happen and still happens, if you went around and asked people about Little Canada, you know, if you're new to the city and you wanted to hear about Little Canada, you might hear, oh yeah, it was terrible, maybe what happened. But you'll also hear, you need to understand, the place was a mess, it was slums, it was, you know, the buildings were all rotten, and, you know, I live in a cold water flat. That's true. Some of the buildings are in bad condition, okay? The infrastructure is bad because they didn't invest money there. And the other thing you'll hear, oh man, Moody Street, because we live in the section next to Moody Street. Within Little Canada, our section was near Boston Street. Even some of the other French Canadians looked down upon us. We were the inner city. We were the poorest of the poor, French Canadians. So we have all the borrowers on that street. So Moody Street was loaded with borrowers, and that's what you'll hear. Well, place was like a red light district, and soldiers came from Fort Devens, and it was prostitution, you know, and everything else. That was true too. But what you know, what happens when you tear down a community, when you tear down a place like Little Canada that has a history, and you have people, you lose that. And that's the story that gets told. The story gets told by the people who did it, rather than the people who are victimized by it. And I'm hoping, when I wrote this book, what I'm trying to do is reclaim Little Canada for the people who had it stolen from me. The people who aren't represented by being called, they were a bunch of borrowers, they were a bunch of rotten buildings, a bunch of whatever. Because they didn't care for us. They didn't come there to improve our life. They came there for economic development for other people. We just happened to be, since at that time, there wasn't a large black or a minority community in Lowell. We were the closest thing to it. For French Canadian, even Kerouac used to call us the slums in his books. So we were the, as I learned later on, it didn't just happen to us. It happened everywhere. You know, Mel King, you may know of, was a famous activist in Boston for a long time, and had ran for mayor. He came from a similar situation in Boston where his place was destroyed by the urban renewal. In fact, it used to be called black removal because in most throughout the country, during the early sixties, when they were destroying communities, destroying people out for economic development. Yeah, we usually target the black community to do that. And in other cases, when you didn't have a large black community, they just found who was the next least most vulnerable. So this leads to the eighties. And where my activism. I don't have a clock, so do you know how much time?
20 to 5.
Okay. So the good thing is I have plenty of good answers. So anything like this, I'll try and get into the question and answers. It's so much to condense. I'm sorry. But because here's what comes next. In the eighties, the irony is after I educated, went to UO, was in the army, worked in community organizations, the mass for campus here way back, then I started a Lowell Fair Share chapter in Lowell. Then ultimately we became the Coalition for a Better Waco because there was a plan to come in the eighties when Lowell was hot with the Urban National Park and Wayne, and the Central Business District was all being revitalized. All of a sudden I noticed Wayne right around, this is where the poor people live. And this time it was mainly Puerto Rican families. I lived right next to it. I mean, I lived right on the public housing right there. So basically that was my neighborhood, except they couldn't touch me because I was in public housing. But everybody who lived in the tenement buildings were my friends and neighbors, who I played basketball with and hung out with all the time. But they were being targeted, because now that downtown was hot, this land was hot. And they had pulled money out of that community, money that was intended for community development block grants that was supposed to be helping low-income communities, were being taken and putting it into the business district. They get waivers to do that. So our streets, our infrastructure went to hell. They allowed the slumlords to go crazy, code violations galore, because they figured those buildings would come down at some point. So it looked like hell. Drug trafficking was allowed to happen on our streets. Why? Do you think the people, it was only the people there that were buying drugs? We have pickup trucks coming from New Hampshire, all over the place, white people from everywhere buying drugs in there. But if somebody was to drive through and didn't know that neighborhood, they would go, look at the way these people live. Look at those houses, some walls on the outside. Look at the streets and stuff, because they didn't do any infrastructure inside there, because they were putting it all downtown. Look at the drug trafficking. Why? Because the police contained it there. So they didn't have open selling in Belvedere or Highlands or other places. It was basically what, we're gonna contain the market here. And we have the extra benefit of blaming those people for it. And what I knew, these are my friends and my neighbors and stuff, they were the ones that were victimized by all of the stuff that was going on. You could go in the apartment to eat off the floor, but if you look at the building on the outside, you think everybody, lived like a bunch of pigs, as they would say, and it was just so galling. And so what I learned from this thing is we have to find power. We have to find power because nobody's going to come to our rescue. And so my story with Little Canada, I went to the homes of people and said, look, they're targeting you. They're targeting you because you're Puerto Rican. All right, you're the most vulnerable. They did that to me when we were the most vulnerable. They killed my Aunt Rose. They killed other people. Let me tell you how that happened. And let me tell you what it did to me as a kid. I was traumatized. I went through all my life after that saying, who did this? Why didn't anybody stop this? Now they're coming after you. But I'm Paul Revere. The developers are coming. This time, at least you won't be taken by surprise like we were. Okay, so this is what we can do. Fight with me on this. I can learn some skills here. Let's fight together on this. Let's put up a stand. I can't guarantee you we'll win. They're powerful. We got powerful forces we're up against. But I can guarantee you that if we fight this thing, got a chance of winning. But even if we don't win, let's say we fight, steal everything in the end, you know. When your kids grow up, kids who are my age now, and they say, Mom, Dad, you know, remember when they came after us, because we're Puerto Rican, you know, what did you do about it? You wanna say, nothing, that's what we can do, you know, can't fight City Hall, you know, and then have them wonder the same thing, feelings that I had, or you wanna be able to say, hey, we did this, we did that, we fought, you know, and so you know, what we're telling people is that they can take you home, but they can't take your dignity unless you surrender. And we are not gonna surrender our dignity. And so, you know, somebody told me that it was a Braveheart movie or something later on. I never watched that movie, so I don't know. So they stole that one. Because I was saying that, wait, I think before the movie came out, but anyways, you know, the thing is, but okay, that's great. Now how do we gain power? You know, against these economic forces, and that's what I was telling people. Well, some of the things that I have learned, ironically, some of us guerrilla warfare. You know, we don't know the violence. You know, there's the idea when you're going after a powerful enemy, you can't go at it directly. You have to find creative ways to hit it and come back and do other kinds of things. So let's find some ways of going after this. And what we did was we realized the image of Lowell was the thing we could go after. We could go, because everybody's, was stories all imagined about how great city Lowell was and how everything is amazing here and until you saw the acre. So we bring in these outside news reports from Newsweek and Good Morning America and everything, and we drag them through the acre and say, is this what you want as your national model for how to revitalize the city? They're doing it, it depends on which track of the side of the tracks you view it from. You know, we're worse off than we used to be, people over there. And so ultimately, that got their ball enough that Lowell became the butt of the acre became the butt of every story. So it was ruining the image that they were trying to run later on. And so we, you know, by using that was important, and then they wanted to deal with us. And what we did was we got people to say, look, you can say that we have nothing to lose when they come to us. I'm back with you. What ended up happening is that they would say, we knew that we could stop subsidies from coming to the large places in Lowell if they denied subsidies for housing that we wanted to build and save. And so we said, if you stop the subsidies because they wanted to stop our housing from coming in, low income housing, they wanted to throw us out. You stop ours, we're going to fight to try and stop yours. And they would say, you never dare do that. We do that. I mean, you really want to know as a person to stop the rain from coming in from Wayne Labs or money to come in from the Hilton Hotel. You know, so, and this is where the guerrilla warfare stuff comes in. You basically say, see, you're arguing from the way you think about things. See, we have a power. You know what our power is? We have nothing to lose. So you wouldn't do that because that would come back and hurt you if you're a politician. You do that. What are we going to lose? You're about to throw us out of our home. So the idea is we're not doing that to Wayne. We're not doing that to the Hilton Hotel. You have to make a decision about whether you're going to do that to the Wayne Hilton Hotel. Because all you have to do is give us the subsidies that we're supposed to have, and we'll all be happy. You know, and that was the bargaining position you need. And that's what we're trying to teach people is that you've got to have bargaining power. You know, you can't depend on goodwill. You know, you get as much goodwill as you can, but we have to come up with strategies that bring power so that you can change things and force the other side that wants to do something. You heard about public-private partnership, right? You know, government, industry working together, and things work out better in the end. Well, why is that? They don't work together because they want to. They work together because they have to, because they're both powerful and they both can hurt each other. They don't. If you're, in the private sector, you can basically, if somebody wants to screw you from the public sector, they can say, well, we're gonna take our business and go somewhere else, and that's gonna hurt you economically. Vice versa, if you're, it's something bad. The flip side is that, if you're an industry or something, you can't just like ignore the city government, government officials, because, they can stop, they can get like public financing for you, they can help the tax rate, they can do zoning regulations, and other kinds of things. So, you get on the bad side, they can make life miserable for you. So usually what ends up happening is some kind of negotiation, you come together and let's find somebody out of this thing. So what I was trying to get across is we need to come up with a community, is to find a way where we can do the same thing, where we have something very there that we can hurt them if they hurt us. So that we can have a public-private community partnership. So, and we want everything work well for everybody too, but not at our expense. You gotta work with us to make it happen. And eventually, we were able to do that. It's too long to go into here, but we found ways where I got the money from Aetna Insurance Company that was supposed to go to the city. That was gonna fund the project that they were gonna do. We found out about it. It was through, I think, the moral authority that we work out of, that we convinced them that you can make a difference here for the people that live in the community if you give it to the Coalition for a Better Acre and not for the white homeowner group that they were setting up to be their front group. And they didn't realize that Aetna Insurance Company wasn't Aetna Insurance Company. It was actually a community group that forced Aetna Insurance Company to give money to groups like us because they were redlining, or depriving money from low-income and communities of color elsewhere, and they were forced to settle out of court. And the settlement out of court was to create this pool of money that they would give to different communities. They weren't going to give it to Lowell. Lowell thought they were going to give it to Lowell. They were going to give it to a large municipality. They were going to go to New Orleans or Oakland or something like that. But we were able to say, if you come in and give it to us, you will save it, because we can then, say that if you refuse that, then Paul Saunders and the city council and everybody are going to have to answer to the national media, why did you turn away millions of dollars in private money because you didn't like this community? And we got the people who were on it, who were willing to say that publicly, because the reason why they were saying we will come in, but because the city was trying to kill us and we stepped away, this has to be cleaned up. So I sent a certified letter to Paul Saunders and everybody else saying, they're going to take this money away and they're going to blame you for it. So you need to step on the city manager, who was the one that was trying to stop for us, work with us, and then we can say, see, it works. And so that was bargaining power. and we were able to get that money, and we were able to save the Edge Triangle and redevelop it for the people in that community. Then later on, the last time I was saying that North Canal Apartments, while we were doing this, there was 267 units of housing that was about to be destroyed. So we just saved less than 100 units, and now we're about to lose 250. So that's kind of a losing proposition. But we have united and worked with the tenants around code violations and other things. We had a community here, and it reminded me of Little Canada. It felt like Mount Rose wanted to develop that sense of community that I lost in Little Canada. And we had that with the tenants did. And they fought together every step of the way. And we declared that there was a battle for site control. The developers wanted the hottest piece of property thing was like Saunders Arena, downtown was hot. That was the hottest piece of land. And it was plans to do private development there and throw everybody out. It was called Cement City. It was the thing that was supposed to replace the housing for Little Canada. Ironically, on the very same land 20 years before that I lived on in Little Canada. And they were gonna do it again to a whole group of other people. Now that land, was valuable to them. And we said, came up with a strategy called moral self-control. Because I followed Martin Luther King's struts, style of organizing with moral authority. It's not just power for power's sake. It's trying to get people to understand that power is not a bad thing. Power is an amoral thing, it has no morals to it, it's how it's used, it's morality. Both, power was enough to create the Holocaust. You can make a Holocaust if you were powerful, but you also could stop the Holocaust with power. So it wasn't power itself that gave it its moral connotation. So it was the same way with us. But you need to get poor people who have been victimized by power, because what is injustice? Injustice is power imbalance. So, that's what it is. So we had to make sure that we totally balanced more to the people who had none. And we had to get people to start thinking of power as a bad word, as an important word, and it's the only way you're gonna save the community, because we didn't have it. But if we, but when we did get it, in North Canal, we won. We won the Acre Triangle, and it drove me every step of the way. It was my Aunt Rose. Because, I couldn't do anything to stop it. I was a kid. And it killed me. And I always swore if I could ever be in a position to stop it from happening to somebody else, that I would use her as my inspiration. And I always felt that she was there with me along the way. Because she gave me the values that mattered to me. She had a spirituality that I wanted to save in that community. And that's was so important. I hope about the book is to try and recapture the soul of people like my Aunt Rose and the nun that taught me, Charbonneau, Harvey, who ran a little bookstore, Captain Jack, this homeless guy who saved my life, literally, figuratively, and figuratively. These wonderful people that, were tossed aside as if it didn't matter. And I'll just say, close with this last little piece that is in my book. I think it speaks to that feeling. That's how worthless they consider my Aunt Rose and the people of Little Canada. Just pieces of junk to be tossed aside if we got in the way of people like them in United. People who are too important to have to explain and justify themselves to us. I hated something, but I didn't know what it was. So then I started hating me. Hating myself for being so useless and powerless to help. That's the trauma I had overcome as a child. And I think lots of other children imagine. So think about that when you hear about forced displacement, no matter where it is. Think about the children. Think about what it feels like. And hopefully, maybe, that's the kind of thing that we can aspire. Who's fighting for the children in that situation? Not only the older people in that world, who's fighting for the children? They carry these kinds of psychological scars. And the last piece is this is what I actually read in the Cox service about somebody said about Little Canada at the end. So in case you think I was exaggerating, somebody was former city planner said, I think that you know a lot of folks who live in Little Canada. And the 6 and 12 unit tenements of the rat infested were just tired buildings that had been 3 or 4 generations of immigrants that say, thank God I moved, because in hindsight, they were better off. My Aunt Rose better off, was I better off? And guess what? The housing was that bad. But guess what? If it was done for them, housing was just as bad in North Canal. When we took over North Canal, it was cement city. The wiring, the plumbing system, the original owners, disaster place. We took over the Acre Triangle with burned out buildings. We rehabilitated. We took people temporarily, moved them to one apartment, and we fixed another one, then moved them back in. If a place really did have to come down, you just moved them right there, and you moved them right back in. You could have kept that community intact. You could have rehabilitated that community for the people. But you have to involve the people in the planning process, and we were never involved. People were never involved in the planning process. You know, nobody knew what was happening. And that's why when we did North Canal and Yaker Triangle, that was one of our, we had two uncompromising principles. No displacement, involuntary displacement by anybody. And two, that people were going to be involved in the planning process. Now, North Canal, I see young dude back there, the director of CBA. Even now, North Canal, the tenants still get to decide who the management company is going to be. So, and we've got a good management company, and that's great. And that management company knows they better be a good management company because the tenant's been fired and we have a new management company when the year comes up. So people are involved, they were involved in the beginning. They fought to save that place. And if you look at it now, and you look at a lot of other low-income housing where people look at it and say, oh, no, these are, you know, affordable housing projects. Take a look at them. They look pretty damn good. People are proud of where they live. And that could have been a little Canada, so they could have saved the buildings, you know, the ones that were saved. And I've seen burned out buildings get fixed up, you know, so there's a lot that can be done. So just don't ever buy that story that it was done for us, please. You know, and fight if you can, when you find anybody else in that situation. And I hope if you read the book, if you can pass it on. I just want people to see what I felt like. And I did my best to recapture the memory of the people I have, and I so much want to keep them alive. And thank you for having me today, and I really look forward to the questions, and I hope I can answer them. And I have so much history, you know, I'm not that great a public speaker, despite what that whole thing is. You know, I just wanted to, I can always think of the things that I forgot to say, but thank you for having me.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, any questions here? You need to use the microphone for the video, so I'll move around.
No, but you're an excellent public speaker, so get that straight.
Yeah.
I think your book is great in multiple ways, and in particular, you talk about how you were able to write still in that 10 to 12 world. That's very striking. Can you say anything about that?
I missed a
How
lot.
you're able to write so well from the perspective of a 12-year-old.
You know, it's funny that, you know, I've heard people, thank you, I really appreciate that, but I almost wish I could take credit for it, you know, in a way that I had some planned work, you know. I think it's really, it was actually easier for me. Because one thing, think about it, you know, like, you don't have to worry about grammar. You know, I can just write the way I felt I sounded, you know, and the way that you know, I recall that I put myself back, I'm just paying for a time. You know, you put myself back into those places and just remember the way I talk, you know, and you know, so it's me and Richie, I don't have to go Richie out, and I think, you know, I just talk the way you normally talk, and so in some ways it was liberating and it was easier. And I'm glad it came out well, but I didn't think it was just because it was real too. You know, it wasn't like I'm Stephen King and have to make something up from scratch. You know, I mean, this was just the people I knew, and this is how I talked, and I probably still talk that way. So all right.
How long did it take you to write the book?
1 year.
1 year.
Yeah, it was funny because I have no rhyme or reason. It wasn't like again, I didn't follow any of the rules about, you know, sitting at the table every day and stuff. Some days I don't know why, you know, like 10 pages would come out. You know, the day I sit there and I bring a sentence up, you know, and someday I try, you know, so it wasn't like it just came in spatters, and, when it came, when I had the thoughts, I mean, I didn't outline, I kept, for the longest time, I was just trying to like live myself back into those places. And it was amazing, maybe you can try it sometime yourselves and go to a place at a time in your life. I discovered this while I was doing it. I mean, obviously there are things in this book that you would never forget, like, when I had a fight with disability and those other kinds of things, that are just, kind of things you don't always remember. So you build around those kinds of things. But then when you go into those places and with those people and you try to recall the scene and everything, all of a sudden like another face pops in, oh, I forgot about that guy, oh yeah, about that one. And then that builds a whole bunch of other things. And so you kind of just scribble that stuff down and then the pieces come together. And what was a little easier for me, I mean, I hope most of it's in sequence. There's a few things I do create, it's called creative nonfiction. What I did creatively nonfiction wise is I changed everybody's names. Obviously, because I don't, want to violate people's, but anybody will know themselves if they read the book, if who want to know themselves, if they're still around. Ironically, I got an email, I got a call recently through my publisher of a person that was the niece of the guy Bill that I just described who lived upstairs from me. And I'm going to be talking to her tomorrow, which is really wonderful for me. And she sent me a picture of him. And that's the other thing. And I know we talk about stories and the importance of keeping stories. Do you know that the other thing we lost in my section of Little Canada, there are no pictures? There's pictures of Little Canada, but not the Main Street side, not Austin Street. At least none that I've ever found. I went to the Park Service, I went to the planning department, went to the libraries. So I'm trying to select individual pictures. We didn't have cameras. Most of the families don't have cameras, So I'm sure there's private photos out, but I don't know how to bring them back again. But I would give anything to see it going in my Aunt Rose lived in. I only have one picture of my Aunt Rose, and I don't have pictures of any of those other my friends that I talked about in the book. Captain Jack or any other people. There's pictures of Harvey, fortunately, because people may remember Harvey if we were older. Harvey had a bookstore on Central Street after he left Little Canada. He was an institution here from the 70s and 80s downtown, and he started in Little Canada. And he was my Harvey, before anybody else's Harvey. But there's some pictures of him, fortunately, they're not on Merrimack Street. So if anybody ever knew anybody who had pictures of that, bring them to the library or something, so it'd be helpful. But I'm going to see a picture of Bill finally, which I'm really looking forward to.
If you find any of those photos, you can bring them to the Center for Lowell History. You can contact me or you can contact Tony Sampis. And we would love to have some of those materials to build our archives.
Charlie, first of all, you're not the only 1969 graduate here tonight, but Lowell High School for me, St. Joe's for you. And being a lifelong Lowellian, to this day, Lowell still has a pretty active Greek community, Portuguese community, and Irish, although I think the Irish is spread out a little bit. I don't get a feeling that there's that much left of French Canadians. Do you think that the quote urban renewal project had an effect on that?
I do. I think there's still a French Canadian thing, but obviously the Little Canada thing, especially my section of Little Canada, is gone. I think there's still a big French Canadian thing, but it's kind of like in Kentuckyville and Centralville and Drake. There's a lot, and they still have Franco-American events and things of that nature. But my part of Little Canada was lost. The part I said that was near the church. I can't find any pictures or anything of that. But I know Louise Pellequin and there's other people right. I don't know if you ever seen Dick Howe's blog. She contributes a lot of really good material because her father or grandfather used to be involved with the 12 newspaper way back, and she's been doing a lot. She has a lot of archives, and she can try to bring some of that stuff back. So there are people doing things trying to do that. The irony is, Portuguese beans, If you want some, you can get them at Cody's. I heard the song in the book, which I'm really happy about. Because understand, people understand tongue in cheek, I'm a kid, I'm a custom eater, that's me, my mother ate, everybody loves what chef's keys, I'm the opposite person who does. So I think that they kind of understand the idea that this is like a kid. And I'm just being honest, I don't want any attention. But yeah, you can get them. I think, you told me she had an experience with it.
We have a question over here.
It's not much question, but speaking of graduating in '69, I'm an education graduate, '69, so 7 years ago, I was in this building, before graduation. I graduated in '69, and then I had a 33-year, elementary school teaching career. But anyways, I have, a great aunt and great uncle who had a beautiful house at the top of, well, there was no real Asher Park at the time, but we lived up at the top of the hill before you get to the bridge. And they had a 2-family house with acres and acres behind, and they farmed, especially a lot of fruit things, strawberries, raspberries, and everything. And they were the victims also of the urban renewal. And they wanted to give, they were going to take by eminent domain their house and give them a pittance of what it was really worth. And my aunt and uncle didn't know what to do, they were going to take it anyways. So they accepted the offer. They even went to one of the councilmen who was French. Mr. Monsieur, I think it was. And he wouldn't help them, even though he was French Canadian. And they told him that it wasn't a desirable area. And so when I moved there, the new dormitories years ago for UMass Lowell, and that was a very desirable location. So I think it's almost the start of also building for the university. Because after that went up, there, more buildings went up, and over where Rotini was, and a lot of other buildings around there. So if that was eminent domain or taken, and that's it, So
It's amazing, like, but, like, I was thinking, I'm thinking along those lines, but it was like, one of the things I didn't say, when I was talking about saving, the importance of saving history. And say, like when you destroy a community, what gets lost in that community. Well, there's another piece, but I just want to get off my chest, and that's about like, how I get angry when I hear about, wow, places like that. People better off anyway, they think travel. The other side of it too, it tends over romanticized. And what I don't like, and I won't accept, at least in my part of the heritage, is the idea of like there's something exceptional about us. The idea is that, we are special. Other people are special. The idea is that wish we had preserved what we had because we had so much more often for other people. Not because we're better, not because we're dominated, but we have so much to offer other people, just as so many people have to offer us. And I think about it like, when we think of how easy it is for demagogues to take things like that and build tribalism. I'm not talking about tribalism, but I talk about my pride and my French Canadian heritage. That's not tribalist. It's pride of my Aunt Rose and the people that I knew and all the people who did everything they could to build a community for me. And whatever the good that they had to offer that I take and work to help other people with, that which to me was part of that heritage, but I don't want to have it be used by demagogues where it's like, it was us against them. And I think it's really important when people do that, kind of, that's the thing, not to make it tribal, but to find a way that we can do things together. When you're building a house, let's say we're carpenters, let's say the French Canadians were carpenters, right? I mean, the Irish are the electricians, you know, and the Greeks are masonry people, and the Puerto Ricans are the architects or whatever. You want the house that's built by all of them, or you want the house that's only built by the carpenters? You know? I mean, so when people try to pretend it's strength and tribalism, it's just the opposite. It's the idea that if we can all bring the best of ourselves to serve each other, then we all benefit. And don't take anybody's culture away from it. Try and preserve every culture so that we can all benefit from each other, and all, you know, follow our cultures together. And to me, that's the legacy that I hope I take from it.
I have a question.
Hi, I'm a graduate of St. Joseph's High School, 1964. You graduated, I guess, a few years after me. 69. When I started there in 1961, I think I was one of the first classes where they allowed students from non-French speaking elementary schools to attend. I was an immigrant from St. Patrick's Elementary School. I lived in the acre, I lived in the housing project, Aaron Terrace, Common Avenue, whatever. Even when I went to St. Patrick's Church, as in elementary school, during Lent, I spent more time at St. Jean the Baptist Church going to mass in the morning with the French people, and it was amazing. Now, I have another question. We talked about urban renewal. That was a big panacea when I was growing up, and as a little kid in Lowell. Urban renewal, the civic leaders, everybody was pushing that. They not only pushed it in Lowell, they pushed it in all over the country. I can remember they talked about it in St. Louis in the 1950s. They built this tremendous housing project, urban renewal. It was going to be the panacea, the big end all. 25 years later, they tore it all down. It had been turned into a slump. And so when you talk about urban renewal, I can remember reading the Lowell Sun seemed to be pushing it back in the early 60s and late 50s. I mean, they were behind us. And the urban renewal, the people, the civic leaders, the city council, they were pushing it and pushing it. And then when the poor people, French Canadians or whatever, would raise a question about it, the city council would think, okay, maybe. Then they turn their back on it. They didn't seem to care. And that's the problem when you don't have enough power. As you indicated, you've got to get people together, but they didn't consider these people to be real people. Let's just get them out of the way, push them out. And what's happening is the new developers come in, and what do they build? High rent homes and housing. You look at the mills in downtown Lowell, what have they been converted into? I know I couldn't afford to live there. I bet you most of us couldn't afford to live there. I doubt it. And then another thing, I guess I'm just carrying on, but when developers do come in, they should be thinking about the people who live there. They're thinking about the money. I have a final question on Merrimack Street between Suffolk and Cabot, across from where it used to be Marie's Fish Store and all these great places down there. They're building a whole new complex down there. I think St. John Dark is doing it. Do you know who's directly involved in that? Are you involved, or? It seems to be, it's going to be, once again, high-end stores and high-end rent places.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, because I am not active, you know, now, as like an activist, you know. So I mean, but young Gene knows more than I do.
Yeah, I just see it going up. I mean, I haven't lived in Lowell a number of years, but I was born and raised there.
Yeah,
And I still love it. I mean, but I can remember when downtown Lowell used to have Bon Marché, Cherries, and all these beautiful stores.
Well, that's the other thing, you know, is about, we had a living city, we had a walking city,
Yeah,
you know, and that's now, if you see the new trend in urban development, if you're rich, is to try and create walking cities in Boston and every place else, because they realize, oh, if you have some money here, you have this, all these wonderful things that Americans did. We had that, you know, it wasn't fancy stuff, but we, you know, we had supermarkets, we had bowling alleys, we had movie theaters, we had other kinds of things. We didn't need a car. You know, that's part of the urban renewal about this too, it's part of the whole highway system. Was, you know, that's why the, set drive was part of their thing. They were just trying to move cars in and out and everything else, and that made us poor. Even though we have the same amount of money. When we lost all of that stuff, not just over here, but all of that stuff, you know, was suburbanized. All the supermarkets went with it out there, you know, the chunk store, all the things, but all those things we have. So people, poor people in the inner city have to buy their food at 7-Eleven, you know, sometimes, you know, or places like that, you know, and you don't have the options that I did when I was a kid. So even though we were poor, it felt a little less poor. And you also had a community. You had like the unity. You had people, neighbors helping each other. You know, my mother would run out of money, you know, money at the end of the month, because we're on welfare sometimes, you know, like regular help us. So that's the other thing I love the unity of that neighborhood. A lot of people talk about the bars and everything on there. I don't know if people know this. I didn't know it back then, but there was also like an openness and a tolerance from my community. You know, that part of the French Canadian community, not the whole part, that part that lived there. There was a gay bar and there was a lesbian bar. It was like Moody Gardens was where the women went and Majestic Club was where the men went. Guess what? I didn't know that. I just knew they were bar rooms, just like all the other bar rooms that I knew. And guess what? My neighbor Raymond, turns out I found out years later, he was a gay man. You know, lived next to us, and there were other gay people that lived in the building. Or whatever. I never knew that. You know, because it didn't matter. It didn't matter. To me, it was Raymond. You know, to me, you know, it was the old biddies upstairs, you know, and you know, Raymond babysat, you know, it was like, there were, and that's where I kind of got my Aunt Rose too. It was about this kind of tolerance. There was an anti-clerical thing. There was two kinds of French Canadians. One that's like devoted to, you know, like whatever the cleric says. And there was a kind of anti-clerical too. That's where my Aunt Rose was from. She was in the church and she was saying like Jesus is my Bible. And she always would talk about Jesus. She would say every day, Jesus was helping people. I thought Jesus was the coolest of all, you know. You know, and that's what I wanted to be, you know, her version. Then I go to listen to the pastor. You know, it's like the Beatles upon years. You know, and I saw it with my Aunt Rose when she had that thing at the end, you know, she tried to be respectful, but she had this kind of little thing, and I don't know, you know, as Mercedes, and I was in Quebec, I don't know if it goes all the way to Quebec, if it was just a long French Canadian thing. But I remember you said the Swedes, you know, I didn't know learn how to speak French. Because my father was Italian, you know, it's a long story. But the thing is, I hear French Swedes, you know, like, and they, you know, and one of the things that always amazed me is they always had this Swedes like the Chris revive, you know, so, and I found those are like clerical pieces. You know, like the Sublime things I think they put under when we were doing the English or whatever, pricing and tabernacle and stuff on. I remember the English, there were no swears like that, you know, we said Jesus Christ, you know, say things like that, but I never heard those like things that were kind of directed at the clerical thing. I found out like Paul Marion and some other people later on knew more about the hers than I did, but there was a kind of anti-clerical strain from some of the people who saw through the clerics who were working to kind of keep them down as opposed to teaching the word of Jesus. There was two strains in the church. One was very progressive and one was very not progressive. And and I think that's true of every religion. You know, but I'm always grateful that I got mine from my Aunt Rose. And you know, it's funny when I ran into Martin Luther King later on, that's what resonated to me. It's because I thought, I saw that now. You know, and, I like this stuff, you know, and it was nice because it kind of reinforced things, and that's the kind of power I was drawn to.
For the camera.
I really enjoyed the story. We're going to read the book. And I was just wondering, I've been in Lowell since the 70s, as a teacher for 30 years. The university. And you keep mentioning them and they. And I'm just wondering, them and they at that time, was it the Songuses, Logan, City Council, who were they?
You mean a little Canada time or a later time?
The days of coming into urban renewal.
Yeah, that was way before some of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was born in the 80s, the 60s was before.
So when you mention they and them, who are they?
That's what.
And are they still here?
That's the irony about that is that, and that's why I learned later on when it was happening in other places. The reason why it was faceless was because more than it being a person, it was systemic. It's like, you know, that's why you have institutional racism or institutional classism. It almost didn't matter who the faces were, because it was more than one. It was like, you know, people who were part of the class of people who basically, you know, who were, you know, economic development, you know, their interests as opposed to my interests. And that's one of the dangers also, I think, about tribalism and ethnicity. Because one of the things, the irony is that some of the people, you know, I'll let the historians say their names, but, you know, some of them had their names on buildings, but French Canadians, you know, it wasn't just other people. There were French Canadians who sold out French Canadians. And there were Greeks who sold out Greeks, you know, and God knows there's Irish who sold out Irish. But the thing is, but so many of us were taught to these people as heroes because they had money. So they could contribute to the softball team, they could contribute to the church, contribute to all these different things. So, you know, because they can, money, but it also kind of like got people away from seeing them at the same time. They were buying up property. You know, some of them worked for the bank, you know, and they made a killing. And the urban renewal came through because those buildings they all held on to, like monopoly pieces on a board, they got big money for to get rid of. And so that's the danger. And the problem is that sometimes people from an ethnic group, especially if you're down, you look to somebody who makes money from that group is feeling like, I got pride in that because see, there's somebody around me that made it, you know, like I have more in common with the Greek laborer and the Irish laborer than I did with those rich French Canadians who sold our community out. And so it's important when I say I want to preserve my heritage and culture, it's not just this kind of like, oh, because I speak French only. It's because of that part where I learned those kinds of things and they help me distinguish, you know, that our struggle was other people's struggles too. And I think that's true that we find that. I have a friend, Michael Patrick McDonald, who loves great book on South Boston. You know, he grew up Irish and he grew up in Southeast. And he tells a story about how it bothered him growing up there, you know, in the projects, because we're like almost two Southeast. And all the politicians and the demagogues that were going on doing buses and stuff, they lived in the nice section of the Southeast. He lived in the projects, but they had all the people in the projects fooled, and was Whitey Bulger was going around doing drugs in the community, and he lost like 4 siblings through either murder or suicide. Many families were, just as many families were being killed and committing suicide in South Boston, full part of South Boston as they were in Roxbury. But he said when he grew up, the difference was that the people in Roxbury acknowledged it. And the people that bothered him, the Irish were told, don't say anything bad about your community. They would say, basically because you're better than those people. And that's what kept people down for so long. And he had to do his healing only when he went to the Black community. And not realize that they were allowed to say, that these things were happening in the community from outside forces or whatever. And what you needed, you can't just do this. The pride isn't just like wearing a shamrock, just saying I'm better than somebody. It's like, anyway, who knows?
We had one last question here, and then I'm looking at time, so we're going to have to wrap it up after. But we'll have more time to talk, and I'm sure Charlie will be available a little bit afterwards. And also, I'm hoping that this is like a first talk in a series of talks about Franco-Americans in Lowell and about Little Canada. And so that we can create a better kind of collaboration and exchange and like be able to remember all of this. And also collaborate with the Center for Lowell History to be able to do that. I'll pass the mic.
Hey, Charlie, your book cracked me up. It's fabulous. Where did you get your writing style? It reminded me of Gene Shepherd or Harrison Keeler, or even those who wrote Frank McCoy, who wrote Angel's Ashes. All similar. It reminded me of Gene Shepherd. Cracked me up. Sequel.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I don't know where it comes from. The only thing I wrote before was a songwriter. And, it was one like John Lennon, that was my hero,
Yeah.
And,
Read the book, yeah.
For the rock singers, I want to write songs. I wrote, I like music, I wrote the music with the words. But I think one of the things that maybe somebody had told me that maybe was helpful to me as being a songwriter is that you force as a songwriter and try to, you got to say a lot in a little system or whatever. So maybe I just kind of had some of that going. I don't, I mean, but it's just, I guess I was just trying to write what I felt.
You nailed it.
Oh, well, thank you. And as far as a sequel, I'm probably not gonna write that kind of sequel. I'm gonna have these little short stories here occasionally, but I think on that time period, that'll get out there. I got a few, maybe it'll be in Dick House blog at some point soon, but the next book that's gotta be written, it's a different kind of book, and I hope I'll be able to do it, and I'm trying to do it. And that's where I was talking about the 80s, what we did in the 80s. People don't know, the idea of like Little Canada was destroyed, we understand when you destroy a community, you destroy the stories, you destroy, the important lessons that come from there. Well, sometimes even when you succeed, that happens, but it happens in a different way. There was an amazing movement that took place here in the 80s that is not well documented at all. With CBA and a lot of other things that you were doing, it wasn't just housing, it was now segregated schools in the city during that decade. We worked to bring, daycare, we fought, to gain power over the city council and the school committee. We had the level of power. We organized enough that we were able to control the majority of the city council and school committee is. That's why we were able to save North Canal off the money, because we kept the city manager who was going to work with us, as opposed to the city manager we were trying to put in that was going to take North Canal down. And and we got the school committee that desegregated the schools. That was resistance doing that before. There was an amazing movement that took place with a lot of other people. Our history is lost. You know why? Because we didn't write it. We don't write the history. The power structure that who opposed us every step of the way. Basically, when all of those things ended up becoming a success, it's like, well, that was where it was always going to be. We all wanted, we all wanted to do this, that, and that. And that's right, because part of the struggle is when you're in that situation, you want to bring those people, not that you're never going to bring the bigots and the demagogues over, but those people who are in between. the people that are kind of like, they're not bigots or whatever, but they're not gonna like, they're still gonna choose economic development over you. Or whatever, you can win them over though, if you get enough power. You just need to be pushed over a little bit, and so, but when you push them over, you need to make sure you're telling them how grateful you are. And how powerful, because you need them as friends, you need to win. Because, it's ultimately getting more enough people that on your side so you can win. The problem over time though, is that it's all of a sudden, the people who did it at the grassroots lose the history. So when you see buildings get named, in the city, you'll see buildings named after racists in the city. You'll see, buildings named after every kind of person in the world. You won't see any buildings named after grassroots leaders, you can't, and I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about like other people, there's some people that did so much work in that period of time, and that can't be lost, because the problem is that things have regressed in a lot of ways from what happened in the 80s. And if people knew that history, there were strategies and lessons there that could help this new generation of people who are disempowered to maybe find out that no, it's not impossible. The apathy of powerlessness can be overcome. We have proof that there's ways of doing this. And that's from, I'm hoping to try to write that story where I can, because I have all the documents, that basically show, when we say bang, 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 this happened, and this person was in the way, and we got to do this time or whatever. I want to try and get all of those strategies, that took place, and I hope that there'll be an historical record of it, so that people, will know what took place in the 80s. So then you'll see the opposite of Little Canada. Little Canada failed, because people weren't organized. North Canal and April Triangle succeeded because people were organized. And it was not because one was better than the other, it was a bunch of conditions. But the bottom line is, there's a legacy that can be taught and needs to be taught, and it hasn't. There's a power structure closet there. I don't want to act like, oh man, we're all gonna do that anyways. Well, they would. And but we want, and it's there, but it's just important that story gets told. And I hope I can tell that one. I don't think I can write that one as well. So I think, because I'm not going to be writing as a little kid, so I'm gonna have to do grammar. We got these footnotes,
Thank you so much, Charlie, for being